The Tokyo public transit system is world-renowned, but how many know the structure behind it, how it isn't a single unified system? Let's take a look under the hood and discover the inner workings of one of the world's most impressive transit-oriented development projects. First, a bit of a history lesson. The first passenger line to serve the Tokyo public was financed by the businessmen Noritsuga Hayakawa and civil engineer Furuichi Koei. Breaking ground in 1925, the original line opened 2 years later in 1927 and went from Ueno to Asakusa. The final station entered service in 1939. During this time period, while Japan did have a Ministry of Railways important on national and intercity level, the government would allow private enterprise a fair amount of freedom and flexibility with regard to operating local and regional trains. In 1941, the local government, under the backdrop of World War II, decided to merge the two companies, at the time a not unheard of practice. The merger would take these two firms and create what we now know as the Tokyo Metro. The 1950s and 1960s saw a large boom in construction of the Tokyo Metro network. The longest construction time by far between first and last station opening of the metro goes to the Hibiya line, where construction took place from 1961 to 2020. What tends to complicate matters in researching some of these stations and their history is that many of the original stations, like Ueno, were not built when they began operating with the Ginza line. Instead, they began operating years and years ago, decades before their modern use. Indeed, if we zoom out to Japan as a nation, the first railway began service in the 1870s. If you want to learn more about the ministry that oversaw the first railway project in Japan, I made a video on that you can check out in the card to the right or in the description down below. Today, there's a truly massive amount of providers servicing the greater Tokyo area's transit needs. Despite this seemingly massive web of providers and train lines, the lived experience of getting on and off the rail is fairly simple. It's the same as in many cities around the world. The process is relatively straightforward. You go up to the ticket counter, select your language, purchase a trip either to your destination for the day, or you fill up your rail card and you get on the train. Many stations these days have braille markers on the ground to show how far you are from the train tracks. Many stations also have kiosks with prompts in English for those who do not speak Japanese. Certain more high-traffic stations, like I imagine Shinjuku, have signage additionally in Korean and Mandarin Chinese. The government structure of the Tokyo public transit network is fairly straightforward. Despite the massive number of service providers, there are two primary operating lines performing distinct functions within the greater Tokyo area, with one larger managing authority at the municipal level. These two primary providers are the aforementioned Tokyo Metro and the Toei Subway. There's also these unique little instruments of government called a third sector rail company. These public-private entities operate as a way to get from the Tokyo Metro or the Toei Subway to a suburban part of the Tokyo Metro area. For instance, the Toyo Rapid Railway Company extends from the Tozai line on the Tokyo Metro out into Chiba Prefecture to service those localities. The Japan Railway Network, like elsewhere in the country, is a very, very strong force in the Tokyo Metro ecosystem. They run the Yamanote line, which in particular is a key service junction between major stations and sections of the city. It opened under the direction of the Ministry of Railways on November 1, 1925, just as the Ginza line was breaking ground. As discussed in my Tokyo zoning video, the city is fairly decentralized as far as governance goes, with a shared responsibility to provide mass transit. The final system, known as the Toei Subway, was founded and run by the municipal government to act as a separate rail network out towards the special wards within Tokyo. The way the subway has set up its branding of train lines and stations, they are complementary to the larger Tokyo Metro system. Some of the lines and stations in the Toei system that could be marked similarly or identically were given separate letter designations. From an outsider's perspective, the Toei Subway is at this halfway point of being both a commuter line to those in the suburbs and a through line towards other major stations. There are 3 stations currently operated both by the Tokyo Metro and Subway system. The layout of the subway is in such a way to facilitate rapid transit from one end of the city to another without a lot of stops in between. The Toei network is also where you're going to find a lot more of the third sector rail and private rail investment. due to the network covering more ground than the Tokyo Metro and being a convenient launching off point for the municipal governments to have a local connection for their rail service. While the stations may lack the huge mall complexes of Hong Kong and Seoul, and may be very crowded depending on the time of day you decide to ride, from what I remember, it was still a very pleasant and freeing experience to know I could go just about anywhere in the city. Based off of 2014 numbers, the Toei system serves just under 2.9 million people every day, and the Tokyo Metro system, 6.84 million. There are a lot of positive reasons for a government to start investing in public infrastructure, such as mass transit, bike lanes, etc. Reducing the dependency on cars isn't just helpful for emissions and the environment, it has the potential to encourage better public health and aid small to medium-sized businesses that would have access to foot traffic along a given corridor. Although the system may look very complicated on the surface, the city has developed this network over the last century and has managed to make it work. The system allows for the government to set a high benchmark of service, and while there are issues, no doubt, like any other network, the overall experience is leagues ahead of what I had in North America. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this metro system, as well as if there are any more you'd like me to cover in the future. Please let me know in the comments down below.